In this lesson, we're going to have a look at how columns, screens, and frames can be spaced along a path. Now, this is applicable anytime you're dealing with your facade or any type of object that is copied around, and then we'll have a specific number of divisions between a distance. So we have the simplest example here in the garage where we have only 2 columns. So what we're going to do in this instance is we're just going to make 2 rectangles or 2 squares, which are 300 by 300. And we're just going to move them manually so that they are lining up with our construction lines that we have created. Then I'm going to simply copy it across using that construction line as the base point. So that is the easiest example where every time you change one of the columns, you will manually have to go and copy it to the second location down here. What we have when we start to make this a little bit more complex by, let's say, using a column that has multiple directions, for example in the lounge, is it would really help here to use a block. So what we're going to use is we're going to write a block out of this column. Just before I do that, I'm going to stretch it, just S enter, and I'm going to make it slightly wider. Since this is happening in the lounge, it is holding a greater slab above it. So we're going to make it a little bit bigger. Then before copying it, I'm going to turn it into a block. So you can either type WBLOCK for the proper write method where you choose the file location for that block, or you can just type B enter and it will be stored on your drive in the default location. So here we're going to call this column underscore lounge with an O there, and we're going to say OK. Now it has been converted into a block, and we can go and copy it across and then rotate it when we get to that lower rotated area. So here I'm going to rotate it by minus 60 degrees. So 30 was obviously in this direction, so minus 60 would be in the opposite, so that we get 90 degrees. And I'm going to use that center point, that intersection of those 2 lines, to find where it should be along this line. Now what I want to do is I want to copy it to this one, but I'm not going to copy it randomly. I want to mirror it according to the center point of this line so that the remaining portions here would have the same distance. So here we type MI enter. We select the object we're busy mirroring. We find the center point, that's that little midpoint triangle, and we're going to hit the perpendicular point on the opposite line, and that's going to then give us a equal distance from both sides. So that's going to create some order in that. Now the beauty of having done the block, as I explained, is that when you eventually develop your design, you will want to add cladding, hatching, perhaps lighting details, all these different things. And once you do that, all of these other columns will be updated. You won't have to re-mirror, re-rotate, and re-copy all of these different columns. Then you have other instances when you are working on your facade. For example, you are doing a spacing for your windows. Perhaps you are doing a screen that is being copied at a very regular interval, and there are different methods that you can use for that as well. The simplest of which is just copying it manually and choosing the distance between the copies. So for example, if we are doing a screen detail that will be on the outside, we could say, well, an individual screen, let's just choose the Windows layer first of all. An individual screen would be, let's say, 30 millimeters by 300. We have this little fin that will be supported on a frame, and we want to basically move it so that it starts 300 millimeters from the side of the wall. So we move it by 300, press enter, and then make a copy, and then just move it by 300, enter. Then you can make another copy and use the previous object as the base point and just keep copying, and then do the same thing here where you just copy manually. So that is one of those methods which is the most manual and most singular methods without using any tricks or tools. Now the other methods that exist are that you can create a line where you want your object to be spaced along. You'll also need to then see that the line basically starts and ends at the first corner. So you basically will need to reduce that line by the width of the actual object that is being copied. And then to give you an example, we'll use this same screen detail and we're going to create an array of it. So type ARRAY. You'll see it being typed at the bottom left hand corner. So array, we will choose the object, so just follow the instructions on the bottom left. right click, we will choose a path array, so that will actually take that long line and use that as a path. You also have rectangular, which will spread it out in horizontal and vertical in a matrix, and you have polar, which you will be able to choose a center point and it will basically rotate it around. And we will use that polar array later when we do our spiral staircase. So in this case we're using path, so type PA, enter, choose that path, and now type M for method, enter, and we're going to use divide, so D, enter. Next you want to choose items. You can also click directly on the screen, and instead of 149 let's choose 20 and right click or press enter. Then what you've done is you've evenly spaced 20 objects, but it started at the position where this one was. So ideally you would actually position that object on the beginning of your path, but now you can also simply move it into that correct position. So we can move it there, and we basically have this spaced from end to end. You can either leave or delete this one that there is. So that array command allows you to constantly update that the array, and you still have the original array in place, so you can go and actually edit all those different figures, and you can very easily use that generative method of spacing out your drawings, your object along that line. There is one more method that I'm going to share with you that is very useful, and it is somewhere in between the two that I've just shown you. The first thing you do is you draw a line, and let's just move this line slightly up so that we can see it clearly. The next one is called divide. All you do is you type in div, enter. You click on the line that you want to divide, and then you type in the amount of segments. Now segments and cutting points are different, so there will always be one more segment than there is cuts. So if you cut a line once, you have two segments. So just remember that those segments refer to the portions and not the amount of slices. So let's say we would want 20 segments here. We click enter, and then you can go and delete that original line. It will actually create these points, so you'll have 19 points and 20 spaces in between that you can then use to space your objects. So this is really helpful, as well as you can just keep those little points as very easy and efficient base points. So you can then just copy that across and then use those points as a base point to copy with. So this is something, if you have a distance and you don't know the distance in between the two, you just have a total distance and you know the total amount between that point, you can then use that divide method. So these three methods pretty much will cover the main creation methods for any type of screen or frame or any other small object that you want to copy at a precise interval. Either you know the interval, the spacing center to center, or you know the total distance and the total amount that you want to copy. And also remember that you can use the block technique to actually turn each one of these objects into a block. For example, if you have a complex screen detail with a pivot point if the screen moves, or any type of window detail that you then want to add detail to later, always remember that you can, in the sketch design phase, create a simple square, turn it into a block, and much later come back and then just edit one of those, add more detail, and all your frames in your entire building will update. So that is definitely helpful when you create all of your windows. What I'm going to do now off camera is I'm going to do something exactly like this, where I take a glass line, for example, like this. I'm going to then create main frames for the glass, so 50 by, let's say, 150. Then I'm going to create that glass line. So I'm going to basically just do this. I'm going to copy that across. This will be my main glass line. I will copy a few copies in between, so I will divide it, let's say, 3 or 4 times, and then I will add a screen to the outside. Now I'm not going to take you through that whole process, since I mainly wanted to show you the 3 different techniques. I'm going to be drawing the glass line off camera, and then in the beginning of the next lesson I will talk you through if there are any other tips or techniques that you can pick up from that. So there you have it. What we've covered in this lesson are the main techniques for creating columns, creating blocked, repeated, and rotated columns, and different ways of creating screens, facades, and window frames. So I hope that helps, and I will now go ahead and just do exactly this to the other similar portions around the design, including over here, and then we'll come back to the results in the beginning of the next lesson.